Hello and welcome back to the tutorial series on how to make a 2D top-down survival shooter. So, in videos onwards will be a bit different because I'll be using a MacBook instead of a Windows computer. This is part 4 of the series, and in this video we'll be looking at adding audio into the game, creating a WaveManager, and a game controller that will be managing our upgrades, shop, HUD, and pause. We'll be starting off with fixing some stuff that I forgot to add in the last video. So on the player game object, we need to add a collider 2D, and then after that we need to select the bullet prefab and select the trigger on the collider so it equals true. Next we need to look at the B prefab, and for the B not to get stuck going around in circles bounce off the map, we need to change the linear drag to 0.8 and change the angular drag to 0.05. With these fixes done, you should be able to shoot and hit Bs now with particle effects spawning on the hit, and the B can also die. If the player is hit, then the B should deal some damage to the health script on the player and the B will bounce away. If there are two Bs that collide, then they should start bouncing away everywhere. With that out of the way, it's time to start working on adding our AudioManager to the game. So this will control our audio, and by making this, all of our audio is in one place, making it easier to manage. So let's create an empty game object, and we'll call that GameController. And we want to create a new script called AudioManager. We want to first type public static AudioManager space instance, and then serialized field audio source sounds. We then want to create a new function called void awake, and in this function we want to make sure that there's no other duplicate of AudioManager running. So we want if instance is not equal to null, then debug.log error more than one AudioManager, else instance equals this. We then want to go into our start function and type sounds equals get components in children audio source. We then want to create another custom function called public void play sound, and it takes in a string called underscore name. In the function, we want to create a for loop which has I is less than sounds.length. In the for loop, we then have if sounds in square brackets I dot name is equal to underscore name, and then in the if statement we want sounds square bracket I dot play, and then on a new line return. At the end of the play sound function, we then want to have a debug.log warning in quotation marks AudioManager sound not found in list, and then end of quotation marks plus underscore name. With the basic AudioManager done, we want to add it to the game controller object we have. We then want to add 4 audio sources as children, so we need to right click audio and then audio source. We want the first one to be named gunshot. We then want the second to be named BG for background music. Next is hurt, and fourth as lastly, B death. We want to add the corresponding audio files to the audio sources by dragging the audio from the projects tab into the sources we have. With this complete, we can now call any of those sounds we have under the game controller. So next, we want to create our Hud script. So let's create a new script called Hud, and this script will be controlled by our GameController script we'll create later on. Before we start coding, make sure you have Text Mesh Pro added into your Unity project. You can check this by going into your Windows tab, Package Manager, and import the Text Mesh Pro package. Now that's done, let's open the Hud script and let's start typing. So in the script, we want to be using Unity Engine.ui and using TM Pro. This is for Text Mesh Pro. We then want a serialized field, image, player HP, and then public Text Mesh Pro U GUI or GUI, money underscore T. We then want public Text Mesh Pro UGUI again, wave count underscore T. We then want private health player, and in our start function we want player equals gameObject.find gameObject with tag in brackets player dot get component health. In our update function, we want if player health is larger than 0, then player HP dot fill amount is equal to in brackets float end brackets player dot health divided by player dot max health. Else player HP dot fill amount is equal to 0. This script will be used to manage our player's health on the screen, so later once we finish making our script, we'll create a HUD for our player, and this will manage our player's health bar and show us how much money they have on the screen. Next, let's create a new script called GameController. This will have a majority of our code, and it will manage the shop and certain game features that we'll add. We want to open this new script called GameController, and we want to type the following: using Unity Engine.scene management and using TM Pro. We then want to create a variable called public int money. We then want in square brackets header and in brackets and quotation marks upgrades. On a new line, we then want serialized field int max HP price equals 50, and the serialized field again int regen price equals 50, and on a new line serialized int pistol damage or DMG price equals 50, int pistol FR or fire rate price equals 50. We then want another header called components. Under that, serialized field HUD. Under that, serialized field game object, shop menu, and then serialized field again, game object, game over menu. We then want in square brackets a space, and then under that serialized field text mesh pro UGUI max HP and then DESC or description. We then want serialized field text mesh pro UGUI regen description. Under that, serialized field text mesh pro UGUI again, and then damage or DMG description. Under that, serialized field text mesh pro UGUI, and then FR or fire rate description. Under that, we want another header called debug, and then serialized private bool pause equal to false. We then want private game object player. In our start function, we want player equals gameObject dot find gameObject with tag in brackets player. We then want on another line get component AudioManager dot play sound bg. So as soon as the game controller starts, we want it to play our background music. We then want to go to our update function, and in that we want if input dot get key down keycode dot p, then shop menu dot set active in brackets exclamation mark shop menu dot active in hierarchy. We're then under that going to add some of our future functions. So we want update shop, and then we also want pause game. After our if statement in the update function, we want then hud.money underscore t dot text is equal to, in quotation marks, a $, end of quotation marks, plus money. We then want to create some custom functions. So we want public void gameover, public void add money, and it takes in an integer called amount. We then want public void wave count, and that also takes in an integer called number. We then want void pause game, and then a public bool check money, and it takes in an integer called price. We then want another function called void update shop, and then public void by max health, public void by regen, public void by pistol damage, public void by pistol fire rate. Almost there. Public void restart, and lastly public void quit game. So these will be all of the different functions we'll have in the game controller. We then want to go back to the top, and in our game over function we want pause game, and then on a new line game over menu dot get component animator dot play in brackets death. We then go to our add money, and then in that money plus equals amount. Next, we'll go to wave count, and in that we want to do hud.wavecount underscore t dot text equals, in quotation marks, wave, end of quotation marks, plus number. We then go to our void pause game function, and in that we want to have pause equals exclamation mark pause. So if pause is true, it will equal false, and vice versa. If pause is equal to true, then we want time.timescale is equal to 0, and player.getComponentPlayer.disablePlayer equals true. At the time of this recording, I completely forgot that we had to add another bool into our player script. So just before we continue onwards, we want to go to our player script and add a bool called disable player equals false. With that done, we can go back to our game controller and continue in our pause game function. Else, we want time.timescale equal 1. Then player.getComponent player.disable player equals false. Next, we go to our check money, and then inside that, if price is larger than money, return false. Under that, money minus equals 50, and then return true. So if we don't have enough money for an item, or an upgrade I mean, it won't do anything. And if we do have enough money, we'll buy an upgrade. Next, we want to go to our update shop function and type max HP description dot text is equal to quotation marks max HP end of quotation marks plus player dot get component health dot max HP. We then want regen description dot text equals in quotation marks HP regen end of quotation marks plus player dot get component health dot regen. Next, damage description dot text equals in quotation marks damage end of quotation marks plus player dot get component weapon dot damage. We then want fire rate description dot text equals in quotation marks fire rate end of quotation marks plus math dot round in brackets player dot get component weapon dot fire rate comma 2 end of brackets. So this will just round our fire rate up to the nearest second decimal. We then want to go to our buy health function, and inside that function we want if exclamation mark check money in brackets max HP price end of brackets return. Under that we want player dot get component health dot max health plus equal to 5, and then update shop. So with this, each time we upgrade our player's max health, it will increase by 5. We then want to go to our buy regen and do the same if statement, but with regen price. And then under that, player.getComponentHealth.regen plus equal to 0.1. And then update shop. So in this upgrade, when you do your regen, you'll get 0.1 point of health every 0.5 seconds. Next, we go to our buy pistol damage function and have the same check money if statement, but with pistol damage price. Player.getComponent weapon.damage plus equal to 1. With this one, whenever you upgrade, your weapon damage will increase by 1 damage. And then update shop at the end of that function. We then move to our buy pistol fire rate function, and we have the same if statement in that. And then we want to have an if statement under the return where it goes if player.getComponent weapon.firerate is greater than 0, then player.getComponent weapon.firerate plus equal 0.1, and then else player.getComponent weapon gameover.fireRate plus equal 4. So with this, what will happen is if the player upgrades their fire rate for the first time, it will give them a bit more fire rate to start off with, and then it will increase a small amount each time you upgrade it after the first time. And if you don't have the fire rate upgraded, then you can shoot as fast as you can click. At the end of the function, we then want update shop. Next, we want to go to our public restart function, and in there we type pause game, and then under that scene manager dot load scene, in brackets main scene. After that, in quit game, we want application dot quit. So in this script, it controls the shop we'll be adding in the series later on. It also controls time in the game, so we can pause and unpause our game whenever we want to. It also allows us to have a quit option and another to restart the match whenever we want. Whenever the game starts, it will also start our background music by calling the AudioManager. It will make sure that in the shop we create in the future that we have enough money for purchases, and when we kill an enemy, it will also give us cash, and it will upgrade our player whenever we purchase an upgrade. The next script that we're going to create is called WaveManager. This script will be controlling the waves of enemies we spawn to attack the player. So this will spawn an extra enemy per wave. So on wave 1, you verse 1 enemy, on wave 2, you verse 2, and on wave 30, you verse 30, and so on. So first we want to open the script, and we type serialized field, private float, time between waves, equals 3. So this will be our time between waves, so we wait 3 seconds, and then a wave will spawn. Next, serialize field, private float, enemy molt or multiplier. This will spawn more or less enemies per wave. After that, we want a space in square brackets, and then serialize field, private float, radius equals 5. Serialize field again, private float, inner radius equals 4. Then again, serialize field, private vector 3, origin point equals vector3.0. We then want a header named components. And then under that, we have serialized field game object, enemy, and serialized field animator, wave anim, or animator. Next, we want another header called debug, and under that, public int, wave count equals 1. Serialize field, private float, check interval equals 2. Serialize field again, private bool, draw gizmos. After that, we want to create an Enumerator called spawn wave, another function, private void spawn enemies, and we also want private void on draw gizmos. So in our function on draw gizmos, we want if draw gizmos is equal to true, then gizmos.color is equal to color.blue, and gizmos draw wire cube origin point, comma, new vector 3 in brackets, radius times 2, comma, radius times 2, comma, 0, and then end of brackets. We then want under that gizmos.color equal color.red, and then gizmos.draw wire cube in brackets origin point, comma, new vector 3 in brackets inner radius times 2, comma, inner radius times 2, comma, 0, and then end of brackets. So this, on the onDraw gizmos function, it will show the area of where the enemies will spawn in. So the blue color or cube will be our outer region, and the red cube will be our inner region, and the enemies will spawn inside those two cubes. We then now want to go into our spawn enemies function and create a for loop where I is smaller than wave count times enemy mult or multiplier. Then we want to create a spawn, so vector2 spawn pos or position equals new vector2 in brackets random.range brackets 0, comma, radius, end of brackets, comma, random.range in brackets 0, comma, radius, and then end of brackets. Under the vector2, we then want to have a while loop. So while in brackets vector2 dot distance in brackets again vector2 dot 0, comma, spawn pos, end of brackets is smaller than inner radius. Then in the while loop, we want spawn pos equals new vector2 in brackets random.range in brackets again 0, comma, radius, end of brackets, comma, random.range in brackets again 0, comma, radius, and then end of brackets. Under the while loop, we want to have an if statement. So if random.range in brackets 0, comma, 100, end of brackets, is larger than 50, then we want to change our spawn pos to equal, minus, or negative spawn pos. At the end of that, we want instantiate in brackets enemy, comma, spawn pos, comma, new quaternion in brackets 0, comma, 0, comma, 0, comma, 0, end of brackets. And then at the end of our function, we want wave count plus plus. With our spawn enemies function done, we then can move on to our spawn wave enumerator, and we want a while loop in there as well in brackets true, so it's pretty much never ending. In the while loop, we then want yield return new, wait for seconds in brackets check interval, end of brackets. So this makes it wait a little bit so it's not called every frame. We then want game object in an array enemies equals game object dot find game objects with tag in brackets enemy. We then want to have an if statement that checks if any enemies were spawned. So enemies dot length is equal to 0. Then we want to start a countdown and spawn our enemies. So WaveAnim.play in brackets countdown. Hello again, and sorry for the racket. I forgot another thing in the recording, and that's when you do GameController.instance, we actually need to have the game controller as a singleton rather than a mono behavior. So we just need to do that, and then we can continue on with our programming. Then gamecontroller.instance.waveCount in brackets waveCount. Under that we want yield return new, wait for seconds, in brackets time between waves. And then under that we want spawn enemies. After that we want to go into our start function and type start coroutine in brackets spawn wave. So with this, when there are no more enemies, it will call a countdown from the game controller. This will be used when we create our UI, and then it will wait a bit to call the next wave. The check interval is just to make sure that the spawner doesn't get called every frame for enemies alive. So instead of 180 calls every 3 seconds, it will only call once to check if there are any enemies alive. If there are none, then it will start the countdown for the next wave. If you want to add more enemies per wave, then you can change the multiplier to be higher. And with all this done, we can now spawn waves of enemies, have sound, and in the next video we'll be creating our shop and UI, or user interface. For our game controller to operate normally, we'll need to complete the UI as it depends on it to function. Just before we end this video, let's add some sounds. So we want to go to our weapon script, into the fire function, and just below our bot torso.animate, we want to add gamecontroller.instance.getComponent AudioManager.playSound in brackets gunshot. And then we go into our health script and into our take damage function. We want to rewrite it to health minus equal damage, and then if gameObject.tag is equal to player, then we want gamecontroller.instance.getComponent AudioManager.playSound in brackets hurt. We then want to create another if statement under that one, and it goes health is less than 0 and is dead is equal to false. Then inside that is dead is equal to true, and if gameObject.tag is equal to player, gamecontroller.instance.gameover. Else, so this is the AI now, gamecontroller.instance.getComponent AudioManager.playSound be death. Under that, animator.playDeath. Under that one, we have gamecontroller.instance.addMoney in brackets getComponentEnemy.reward on death. So with this complete, we'll have a WaveManager ready to use, a game controller ready and waiting, we have audio added, and in the next video we'll be making a UI and a shop to integrate with our game controller. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.